Managers. What is the silliest reason you have had an employee call in sick? They're superstitious and refuse to work on any Friday that falls on the 13th because something bad always happens to them. The same person also once told me he cut his hand on a banana. A friend of mine, when he was in his early 20s, called in drunk. Friend, I can't come in. I'm a pretty drunk boss. Oh. You're sick and can't come in. Friend, no. I'm just drunk. Can't make it, boss. No, you're sick. Right, friend. Nah man, I'm just kinda drunk, boss. Okay, I'm putting you down as sick. Get better soon. Not really sick, but I know you're not going to believe this. Some homeless man broke into my house last night and stole all of my pants. I will not be able to make it in today because I have to file a police report and have no pants to wear. Turned out he had gotten drunk and put all of his pants into the recycle for some reason. When making her morning coffee, grounds got in her cup and then her creamer was bad. So because her coffee was all wrong, she couldn't come into work that day. I'm not a manager, but I'm a floor installer and I run my own crew from time to time. We had this one guy who is constantly complaining about how broke he is and how he needs to work so badly, and yet he just didn't ever want to actually show up. Here's a selection of my favorite of his excuses. 1. There was a construction truck parked blocking his driveway. I thought, why not ask them to move? 2. Someone had allegedly been messing with him and slowly letting the air out of his tires. Clearly they couldn't possibly be leaking. They were only 5 years old! 3. Someone had broken into his vehicle under cover of night, removed the motor that operates the windows, and replaced it with a burnt out one on the driver's side. So now his window barely works. I mean, the car's only about 13 years old. Couldn't be wearing out by itself. We offered this dude a full-time job with a guaranteed permanent position if he proves himself. He proved that he would rather come up with any reason to not work. I've got back pain because I fell off the back of a motorcycle. That's fine, mate. Come in when you're well. The doctor said it could be the motorcycle, or it could be my office chair. Okay, well, if we're waiting on the results from the blood test, you're taking a blood test to see if your back pain is from sitting in an old chair or falling off a motorcycle? Yes. He just kept going until it was obvious he was laying. This doesn't count because I ended up going in. Not proud of it, but my boss and I got a hearty laugh. I was a landscaper back in my later teens. I had gotten drunk the night before with my buddies because the forecast said tons of rain in the morning. I get home and pass out, get a phone call in morning from my boss asking where I was. Nearly comatose, I say, it's raining. Isn't it? He laughs and says, get to work. I told him my night and my thought process. He laughed even harder. It was a good day with a hangover as well. Me, as an employee, called into the office and had to explain that I would be very late. A flock of starlings had gotten into a patch of berries and shat all over my car. It was bad enough I had to wash the windshield before I could drive. My boss, probably thinking bullshit, nope, birdshit, drives to my house and sees me scrubbing the windows, stops, pauses, laughs hysterically, then drives away. I didn't have time to wash the car until later that day. It was horrible. When I was a manager, the reason given I most remember is my garage door opener broke and I can't get it up. I once called in because I went too hard on leg day. And I never call sick unless if I'm booked off. My boss didn't believe me and told me to come into work, which I did. I was 2 hours late. The boss and the CEO saw me waddling 5 centimeters at a time and both told me to go home. I refused because I already put in all the effort to get there, not gonna waste it. Interestingly, I became a manager and I'm lucky to not have gotten any silly reasons. I had a coworker that would call in sick on release dates for new computer games. Called in horny. Obligatory, not a manager. He was trying for a baby. Couple was deemed infertile, going through all sorts of treatments and therapies. Dude calls into the manager and says his wife is ready. Manager told him to take the day off. A few months later they confirmed conception past 12 weeks. It was very exciting, but also strange. Had an employee call in sick, saying it was the flu. An hour later, he checked in at George Webb Milwaukee restaurant chain on Facebook and posted a photo of himself standing in a line outside of the restaurant that was 3 or 4 blocks long, waiting for a free hamburger that the restaurant was giving away because the Milwaukee Brewers won 12 games in a row. Some of my favorites: when I was a manager, I can't come in today cause it's too windy and I can't drive my car. I can't come in today because my cell phone broke and I need to go buy a new one. Calling from my friend's phone. I can't come in because I missed the bus and being an hour late won't be worth the money it'd make being there on time. I can't come in today because my work pants ripped and I don't have any other pairs. You can just wear normal pants today. No, that won't be professional and fair to you. I used to work at a trampoline park, and we had one guy who was super greedy when taking parties. He called the store one day and would only speak to me since I was his favorite manager. He asked if there were any parties assigned to him, and I said no. He then replied with, "I'm not coming in. I don't feel too good." I told my general manager, and he said bullshit, and wrote him up for it. Had an employee that had her mother call out for her because she had a little too much to drink on her birthday. Real story, the daughter was in county lockup for meth possession. Found her mugshot online. I had a subordinate once call in sick because he accidentally closed his recliner on his cat and apparently chopped its tail off. The next evening, I asked him what his cat's name was and he couldn't answer. Called in sick. We generally don't ask why for the first 2 weeks. After 2 weeks we have to involve company doctor. Company doctor reported back. Breast enlargement. We were told by Ra not to make a fuss, even though it was not a good reason to call in sick. There was no previous history. I had someone call off because their electricity was out and she couldn't blow her hair dry. I told her to drive with her windows down and hung up. Had to fire her a few weeks later as she got arrested for beating up the new girlfriend of one of her baby daddies. Had a lady call in and say she couldn't come into work because everything was wrong. I asked her to elaborate. She said Venus was retrograde with Mercury, and because she is a Capricorn she is vulnerable and can't come into work as everything is terrible. Like you are trying to call off work because your horoscope is wrong. She screamed, "OMG, I knew you wouldn't understand. You are such an ass," and slammed the phone on me. She didn't last long. I'm a manager, but my own boss calls in sick so frequently that we don't even ask why anymore. Oh, Devin is sick. Shocker. In the last 2 months he's had the chicken pox and like 3 colds. The kicker is that when I try to call out happened once. I had a bad fever, he guilts me into working. He does the same to my employees. I also have an employee who goes home early all the time once a week or so because her daughter starts fights at school. So either she's lying or her daughter is a very violent 4-year-old and someone should be concerned. I have this employee who is late just about every day, other than your typical excuses. So far, her house has burned down twice. There used to be a guy that worked our 6 PM to 3 AM shift. He would always show up, but like clockwork around midnight he would always come into the office with some kind of emergency that forced him to leave early. It was usually a toss-up between my house is being robbed or my house is on fire, but apparently once he burst into the office and said my wife is being raped and then they are going to rob me and burn down the house. I saw one in my LinkedIn feed where a guy cancelled all his meetings for a day because he'd had a dream that there would be a car crash on the motorway that day. Imagine getting that call. So you're not coming in because there's been a crash? Where? Was anyone hurt? What did you mean there's not actually been one? A dream? Not a manager, but a co-worker once called out with the following excuses. He claimed he had gastrointestinal fever, he claimed a kidney stone ricocheted off his spleen, he claimed his car would only ever start on the 3rd try. Edit. Formatting. Obligatory, not a manager, but going to tell on myself for a silly out sick reason. I once had to call out sick because my mother brought home a puppy, set it on my lap, where he fell asleep, and then left to go out shopping, and I didn't know when she'd be back. I wasn't really a dog person, and I was the only one home, and this was a brand new animal in the house that I had to keep out of things, so I called in, because I had a puppy asleep on my lap. My boss was less than thrilled that was my reason, but the way I saw it, I had little other choice. The dog didn't have a crate or anywhere I'd feel safe leaving him for 5 minutes, let alone 5 hours. Still kept my job and got to explain the situation better when I went in the next day. Boss was initially angry on the phone, but with more context and a chat with his wife, and he understood a bit better. Bonus icing on the shooty cake to that day, the puppy woke up at some point and started making a low grumbly noise. I didn't know what he was doing, so I brought him over to my bed to pet him and check him over, make sure he was okay. He needed to pee, so he pissed on my bed. FCKS sakes. Not a manager, but a team lead. Problem I have is getting too much info from those calling in sick, really just emails or IMs, no one calls anymore. At my company you're not required to disclose the reason for taking the time, as long as you have it. Can't tell you how many times people start describing their effed up medical problems and I'm just thinking, please stop, I don't need to know. The vast majority are from our folks in our remote center in India. Some examples: I have an open sore on my face, some sort of fungus, my throat is swollen, and I'm coughing up pus, I'm having uncontrollable bowel movements. I use the old food poisoning call and reason. Real reason was I had an interview at a different company. What I didn't know was 3 other co-workers had interviews at different companies on the same day. 2 of them also had food poisoning and one was my kid got sick. Quite hilarious the next day when our boss asked what or where we ate, all named 3 different foods, 3 different places. I'm sure he knew something was up as he just laughed at us. A girl who had worked at my store a few years ago returned when we needed new cashiers. After just a handful of weeks working with us, doing a great job, and being very friendly I might add, she started calling in last week saying she couldn't get to work because her car was broken down and wouldn't be fixed until, conveniently, the hour after her shift would have ended. She did this for 2 shifts in a row. For the 3rd attempt, the store manager offered to drive the girl to work. The store manager rarely gets days off and often has to come in and pick up everybody's slack, and she was offering to go out of her way to drive this girl to work. Of course, the girl never responded to that offer and we haven't heard from her now a week later. He wanted to take paid leave for a Friday. I knew his favorite band was in town that Friday and their concert would start right around the time work was set to get out. Instead I put him on 24 hours sick time, basically paid time off, and the company only starts tracking it if it exceeds 24 hours, and told him to enjoy the concert. My team colleague called in sick because he missed his train. He would have come an hour late, but I would have needed him that day. Former manager, a guy called in and said that he already had started his laundry process and forgot that he needed to be at work. He wondered if it could be considered a sick day. I'm not a manager, but I did once have a weird reason for calling off. My car died right as I was pulling into my garage. My neighbor had to help me push it in the rest of the way. My girlfriend lent me her car to take to work. I drove down to the corner station to top off the tank. Her car died at the gas station. This was at about 9 PM on a Saturday. No rental place was open. No one I could call for a ride or borrow another car. Had to call off because I had no way of getting there. People thought I was calling off to get a 3-day weekend. I was a grocery bagger in high school and the cashier called out with retina burn. He had driven 4 hours the day before. It was clear and had snowed recently. That combination burned his retinas and gave him temporary blindness. I got to be a cashier after that. He also got to wear sunglasses and a hat in school for a week, which is just frigging awesome. Had a guy who lived within eyeshot of the business. You could look out the front door and see his house. He called in because his car wasn't working. At first we assumed that he was stuck somewhere with a broken car, but a few minutes later another employee pointed out that he was currently out front working on it. Still don't know if he just genuinely did not want to walk to work or he thought that a 3-minute walk was too far on foot. Not in a managing position, but man, I do love the stuff I hear in the office. During lunch break there was this overweight lady discussing something with a coworker. I didn't pick up the conversation, but all I heard was your hate and negativity against me are so painful I might throw up. Half an hour later I hear from her boss that she threw up in the restroom and had to go home since she doesn't feel safe right now. Dude then asked me if I know anything, and I said no as I didn't want to get involved. He further asks how often I have been sick in the last 3 years. Tell him I have no recorded sick days in the last 3 years, and he just goes, wow, that must be hard. I'm like, TF. Oh, I just had a good sick versus vacation day lie a few weeks ago. Not necessarily an excuse, but just a straight up lie. I run the rental department for a group of heavy duty truck dealerships, box trucks, 18 wheelers, dump trucks, school buses, etc. Which means I end up going to the DMV a lot to get tags for new rental trucks, etc. I also have my 2 of my own separate shops from the rest of the dealership to work on my own trucks and my own trucks only. One Monday, I had a young, new mechanic call into my shop manager saying headquarters stomach bug over the weekend. Wasn't feeling much better yet, hadn't slept, etc. Shop manager tells me heads out, my guys do the best they can while down a mechanic. After lunch that day, I go to DMV to title and register 2 new trucks. Side note, in bigger towns, DMV will occasionally have separate windows for dealers and another for large fleets. Who do I see in the line for the general public registering his new crotch rocket? Guy who called in sick. I just called out his name quietly and waved and told him I was glad he felt better. He used to call out sick every once in a while on a Monday. We usually assumed he was sleeping off a bender. Anyway, he hasn't called in sick on a Monday since TH. I'm not manager, but have heard lots of excuses that have made me and co-workers and boss laugh quite often, or some are just super messed up in general, but this one so far has really taken the cake. We have a really religious cook that works with us. Not judging that part, but it's the relevant reason. One day, she found out that one of the other cooks is atheist and called out the next day saying she refuses to come back in because that cook is broken and needs to be fixed. Until she's fixed she wants vacation pay. She's still not back, but calls every day to ask if she's fixed yet. He called in Friday for his Monday shift because he was blind. Had to wait out the weekend to go to a specialist. Doctors gave him 3 weeks off, even though they didn't find anything wrong after scans. He claimed he could barely see. 2 weeks and he walks in for his paycheck. Oh, you can see now. How are you able to see the door and see me and drive here?